The prison lights flickered as the guard stepped into the cell. His voice was cold, almost robotic. "It's time, Jake. Let's go." Jake Morrison lifted his head slowly. His wrists were cuffed, his face lined with 5 years of waiting. Waiting for an execution he swore he didn't deserve. But his eyes weren't afraid, just determined. "I have a last request," Jake said quietly. "I want to see my dog, Max." The guard hesitated. Prisoners usually asked for a final meal or to see family, not a dog, but Jake wasn't most prisoners. "I'll ask," the guard muttered before walking away, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. Jake closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw Max, his golden retriever, the only friend who never doubted him. He remembered the day he rescued Max from the shelter, how the dog had saved him right back during his darkest days. "Just once," Jake whispered. "I just want to see him one last time." Meanwhile, 15 miles away, in a small house on the edge of town, the phone rang. A young woman with tired eyes and messy brown hair picked up. "Hello? Miss Carter, this is Warden Briggs. It's about Jake Morrison. He made a last request involving the dog you've been taking care of." The woman, Lena Carter, froze. Her heart pounded. "Max? He wants to see Max?" "Yes, before, well, you know." Lena bit her lip. She had always believed Jake was innocent. He'd written her dozens of letters over the years, swearing the truth would come out. Now, time had run out. "I'll bring him. Give me an hour." But when she called for Max, there was no response. The front door was locked, but the back window was slightly open. A torn leash lay on the floor. Lena's blood ran cold. Max was gone. Lena's hands trembled as she dialed a number she hadn't called in years. The phone rang twice before a rough voice answered. "Lena, it's been a while." She didn't waste time. "Ryan, I need your help. It's about Jake and Max." There was a pause on the other end, then a sharp exhale. "I'm on my way." Ryan Carter wasn't just her older brother. He was a former cop who had left the force under dark circumstances, the kind of man who knew how to find things, and people, that didn't want to be found. Lena searched the house frantically, her pulse hammering in her ears. Every closet, under every piece of furniture, but Max was nowhere. The torn leash suggested a struggle, but there was no blood, no signs of a break-in. Someone had taken him carefully. Her mind raced back to the night before. A black sedan with tinted windows had crawled past her house twice. She'd thought nothing of it at the time, but now it felt like a warning. Ryan arrived within 20 minutes, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. He was taller than she remembered, his face harder, a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw, a souvenir from his last case. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice low. Lena explained Jake's last request, Max's disappearance, the strange car. Ryan's jaw tightened. This wasn't random. Someone didn't want that dog reaching Jake. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Vince, I need you to track a vehicle. Black sedan, tinted windows, last seen near Pine Ridge last night." Meanwhile, in a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Max strained against the thick rope tied around his collar. His growls were muffled by the damp, cold air. A man in a sleek black suit leaned against a crate, watching him with amusement. "Feisty one, isn't he?" Another man, thinner with cold, dead eyes, stepped out of the shadows. Orders were to keep him quiet, not hurt him. Not yet. The suited man smirked. "Depends on what Jake Morrison does next." Max barked, thrashing against his restraints. He didn't understand the words, but he knew one thing. Jake was in danger, and he had to get back to him. Back at the prison, Jake paced his cell, his mind a storm of fear and anger. The warden had returned with grim news. The dog's gone. Someone took him before we could bring him in. Jake's fists clenched. His last hope stolen. Who? The warden shook his head. We don't know, but we're looking. Jake knew better. If someone had taken Max, they weren't planning on returning him. This was about more than a last wish. This was about silencing something. Or someone. Ryan and Lena sped through the city, following a tip from Vince. The black sedan had been spotted near the old docks. This stinks of a setup, Ryan muttered, his grip tight on the steering wheel. Lena's phone buzzed, an unknown number. Her breath hitched as she answered. A distorted voice hissed, "Stop digging, or the dog dies." The line went dead. Ryan's eyes darkened. They're watching us. At that moment, in a hidden corner of the warehouse, Max managed to gnaw through part of the rope. His teeth ached, but he didn't stop. He could smell the salt of the ocean through the cracks in the walls. Somewhere out there, Jake was waiting, and Max would fight like hell to get back to him. The warehouse door creaked open with a sound that sent shivers down Max's spine. A new figure stepped inside, taller than the others, his face hidden beneath a hood. Max's ears flattened as he caught the scent of gun oil and stale cigarettes. The man in the suit straightened up immediately, his cocky demeanor vanishing. "You weren't supposed to be here until midnight," he said, voice tense. The hooded man ignored him, walking straight toward Max. The dog bared his teeth, a deep growl rumbling in his chest, but the man didn't flinch. Instead, he crouched down, just out of biting range, and spoke in a voice so quiet Max barely heard it. "You're smarter than they think, aren't you?" Then, without warning, the hooded man reached into his jacket. Max braced for pain, but instead the man pulled out a familiar red collar. Jake's collar. The one Max had worn every day before Jake was taken away. The scent of home, of Jake's hands, of the old leather couch they used to share, it hit Max like a physical force. His tail gave an involuntary wag before he caught himself. This was a trick. It had to be. The man's gloved fingers traced the small metal tag on the collar. "He's running out of time," he murmured, more to himself than to Max. Then, in one swift motion, he grabbed the rope holding Max and sliced it with a knife. The dog didn't hesitate. He lunged, not at the man, but past him, toward the half-open warehouse door. The man in the suit shouted, but the hooded figure held up a hand. "Let him go. He's not the one we need to worry about anymore." Outside, the night air was thick with the smell of rain and diesel. Max ran blindly at first, his paws slapping against wet pavement, his mind screaming one word, Jake. But then he skidded to a halt. The collar. The hooded man had slipped something into it, a small, rectangular weight that hadn't been there before. Max twisted, trying to bite at it, but it was wedged too tightly beneath the leather. Back in the car, Ryan's phone buzzed with a new message, a grainy security camera still. It showed Max, alive, running through an alley near the docks. Lena nearly sobbed with relief, but Ryan's face was stone. "This is a trap. They're leading us somewhere." Even as he said it, the image zoomed in, on Max's collar. Something was tucked into it. A flash drive? A note? The message underneath the photo was chilling. "Come alone. Tell the cops, and the dog dies slow." At the prison, Jake was pulled from his cell unexpectedly. The warden's usual cold demeanor was gone. He looked shaken. "You have a visitor." The hallway stretched endlessly, every guard's stare burning into Jake's back. When the door opened, he expected a lawyer, maybe a priest. Not the man who stepped inside. Detective Marcus Veld. The same man who'd put Jake behind bars 5 years ago. Velt didn't sit, he didn't even look at Jake. Instead, he placed a single photograph on the table. A close-up of Max's face, his eyes wide with fear, the edge of a knife just visible at the corner of the frame. "They'll skin him alive while you watch," Velt said softly. "Unless you tell me where it is." Jake's blood turned to ice. He'd spent 5 years claiming innocence, but this was the first time they'd shown their hand so clearly. Whatever it was, they truly believed he had it, and they were willing to butcher an innocent dog to get it back. Somewhere in the city, Max ducked beneath a chain-link fence, his nose leading him unerringly toward the faintest trace of Jake's scent on the wind. The collar weighed heavy around his neck, the hidden object inside clicking softly with each step. He didn't know he was carrying the key to Jake's freedom. He just knew he had to find his human before it was too late. The rain began to fall in heavy sheets as Max darted through the maze of alleys behind the industrial district, his paws splashing through growing puddles. The strange weight in his collar thumped against his chest with every stride, but he couldn't stop, not when the distant echo of police sirens mixed with the shouts of men searching for him. His instincts screamed at him to find higher ground, to hide, but the lingering scent of Jake on the collar kept him moving forward through the storm. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Max remembered the last time he'd been out in rain like this, curled up beside Jake under the awning of their old apartment, Jake's fingers scratching behind his ears as they watched the lightning together. That memory gave him strength now, pushing him past the exhaustion creeping into his muscles. Meanwhile, Lena white-knuckled the dashboard as Ryan took a sharp turn onto the dockside road, the car's tires skidding on the wet pavement. The mysterious message had led them to an abandoned cannery building, its broken windows like empty eyes staring out at the storm. "This is too obvious," Ryan muttered, his hand resting on the gun concealed beneath his jacket. "They want us to walk right into their hands." Lena's phone buzzed again. Another photo, this time showing Max standing near a rusted shipping container, his ears perked as if hearing something. The timestamp showed it had been taken just 3 minutes earlier. "We don't have a choice," she said, her voice cracking. "They have Max right now." As they stepped out into the downpour, Ryan spotted the first surveillance camera mounted high on a lamppost, its red light blinking steadily. They were being watched. Back at the prison, Jake stared at the photograph of Max in Velt's hands, his mind racing. 5 years of maintaining his innocence, 5 years of letters and appeals going nowhere, and now this sudden desperation from the people who'd framed him. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake said slowly, watching Velt's face for any reaction. "If I had whatever you're looking for, don't you think I would have used it by now?" Velt's smile didn't reach his eyes as he pulled out a small device and pressed play. The audio that filled the room made Jake's blood run cold. Max's panicked barking, the sound of a taser crackling, then a whimper that cut off abruptly. "Your dog is very brave," Velt said almost conversationally, "but everyone breaks eventually." He slid a pen and paper across the table. "Locations, names, account numbers. You have 30 minutes before I get the call to put him down." Unseen by either man, a shadow moved in the observation room behind the one-way mirror. The hooded figure from the warehouse watched the interrogation, his gloved fingers tapping a silent rhythm against the glass. In his other hand, he held a small detonator device. Max's nose suddenly twitched as he caught a new scent cutting through the rain, gasoline, and something metallic. He slowed his pace, his body low to the ground, as he approached a chain-link fence with a hole dug beneath it. The scent was coming from the other side, mixed with something else, something familiar. As he squeezed through the gap, his collar caught on the fence, the hidden object inside slipping partially free. Max turned to nudge it back into place when the first gunshot rang out, the bullet pinging off the metal fence just inches from his head. Lena and Ryan heard the shot echo across the docks at the same moment they found the shipping container from the photo. It stood slightly ajar, rainwater dripping from its rusted edges. Ryan motioned for Lena to stay back as he approached, gun drawn. The inside was dark, but the smell hit them immediately. Blood, recent and human. Then a weak groan came from the shadows. Ryan flicked on his flashlight to reveal the man in the black suit from the warehouse, his expensive clothes now torn and stained red. He clutched a bleeding stomach wound, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They knew you'd come," he managed to say before his eyes focused on something behind them. "Run." The explosion rocked the docks, sending a fireball erupting from a nearby fuel tank. The force threw Lena to the ground as debris rained down around them. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Max barking frantically, not from inside the container, but somewhere beyond the flames. As she struggled to her knees, she saw him for just a second, streaking past the burning wreckage, something glinting in his collar, heading straight toward the heart of the industrial complex. Toward what she couldn't imagine. In the prison visitation room, the lights suddenly flickered and died. Jake used the moment of darkness to lunge across the table, his cuffed hands going straight for Velt's throat. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, the photograph of Max tearing beneath them. "Where is he?" Jake snarled, his voice raw with fury. Velt laughed even as he gasped for air. "You're too late. The order's already been given." A crash came from the observation room, the sound of shattering glass. Then the emergency lights kicked on, revealing the hooded man standing over them, his face finally visible. Jake froze. The last time he'd seen those eyes had been 5 years ago, in the courtroom, sitting in the back row. Watching. Always watching. The man raised a gun, not at Jake, but at Velt. "You were supposed to get information," the man said, his voice eerily calm. "Not indulge your sadism." The gunshot echoed in the small room. As Velt's body went limp, the stranger turned to Jake. "Your dog is carrying something very dangerous to very powerful people," he said, pressing the key to Jake's cuffs into his hands. "And you're the only one who can tell us what it really means." Outside, the storm reached its peak, lightning illuminating the silhouette of a prison transport van speeding toward the gates. Inside, a figure hunched over a laptop watched security feeds from across the city, the burning docks, the prison, and a single camera focused on a golden retriever running through the rain, unaware that in his collar rested the secret that could bring an empire crashing down. The game had changed, and Max, soaked to the bone but still running, was now the most important piece on the board. The storm's fury reached its peak as Max bounded through the flooded streets, his golden fur plastered dark against his body from the relentless downpour. The object in his collar, now partially exposed, bounced rhythmically against his chest with each stride, its metallic edge catching occasional flashes of lightning. His muscles burned from hours of running, but the scent trail he'd been following grew stronger with every block. The faintest trace of Jake's aftershave mixed with prison soap, and something deeper. Something uniquely human that Max would recognize anywhere. He skidded around a corner into an alleyway, his claws scrabbling for purchase on the wet pavement. When suddenly, the scent changed. Another familiar smell layered beneath Jake's. Lena's lavender shampoo, Ryan's gun oil. They had been here recently. Max's ears pricked forward as he caught new sounds beneath the drumming rain. Shouting voices, the screech of tires, and beneath it all, a low, electronic hum that made the fur on his spine rise. The alley opened onto a derelict parking lot behind an old electronics warehouse, its broken windows like jagged teeth in the flashing lightning. 3 black SUVs formed a semicircle near the loading docks, their headlights cutting through the rain to illuminate a scene that made Max freeze mid-stride. Lena knelt on the ground, her hands bound behind her, face streaked with blood and rain. Ryan lay motionless a few feet away, his shirt dark with what could only be blood. Towering over them stood a figure Max recognized instantly from the warehouse, the cold-eyed man who had watched while others discussed killing him. The man held a pistol casually at his side, speaking into a radio. Package still missing. The woman claims not to know, but we'll persuade her. As if sensing the dog's presence, the man suddenly turned, his gaze sweeping across the parking lot. Max instinctively ducked behind a dumpster, his body trembling not from cold, but from the primal urge to protect, warring with the instinct to flee. Inside the prison transport van speeding through the storm, Jake pressed his face against the reinforced window, watching the city blur past through water-streaked glass. The hooded man, who had yet to give a name, sat across from him, methodically cleaning a pistol with a rag. "They'll have trackers on all outgoing vehicles," the man said without looking up. "We have about 8 minutes before they realize you're not in your cell." Jake flexed his newly freed wrists, the skin raw from years of cuffs. "You still haven't told me who you are," he said, "or why you care about Max." The van hit a pothole, sending a jolt through the compartment. When the man finally met Jake's eyes, there was something unsettling in his gaze. Not quite pity, not quite guilt. "Because the flash drive your dog is carrying?" He leaned forward. "I'm the one who put it there 5 years ago." A sudden explosion rocked the parking lot, sending Max scrambling backward as one of the SUVs erupted in flames. Through the smoke and rain, new figures emerged, tactical gear, rifles, moving with military precision. The cold-eyed man shouted orders, dragging Lena up as a human shield while his remaining men took defensive positions. Max saw his chance. While the chaos unfolded, he darted between overturned crates toward where Ryan lay. The man's eyes fluttered open as Max nudged his face with a wet nose. "Good boy," Ryan gasped, his hand weakly gesturing toward his boot. Max understood, clamping his teeth around the knife hidden there and carefully pulling it free just as another explosion lit up the night. In a nondescript office tower downtown, a bank of monitors showed live feeds from across the city, the burning prison transport route, the firefight at the warehouse, even a grainy shot of Max dragging the knife toward Lena. A well-dressed woman in her 50s studied the screens with detached interest, her manicured fingers tracing the rim of a wine glass. "The dog continues to surprise," she mused to the silent operatives flanking her. "Pity will have to put him down." She tapped a key, and new images appeared. Blueprints of the city's underground tunnel system, with a pulsing red dot moving steadily beneath the streets. The retrieval team failed. "Initiate contingency Hydra." As her subordinates scrambled to obey, she opened a secure line. "Marcus? It's time we discussed your failure in person." The voice that answered wasn't Velt's. It was the hooded man's, distorted through a voice modulator. "Marcus is unavailable, but don't worry. I'll be seeing you soon." The van door slid open to reveal not the expected police barricade, but the gaping maw of an underground service tunnel. Jake hesitated, but the hooded man shoved him forward. "Move. They'll have thermal scans up within minutes." As they sprinted through the damp tunnel, the man finally pulled off his hood, revealing a face Jake had seen before, in news reports about a decorated federal agent killed in the line of duty 2 years prior. "Name's Daniel Carter," the man panted as they ran. "Ryan's brother, Lena's uncle, and the reason you're not dead in your cell tonight." Above them, the city burned. Below them, something far more dangerous stirred. And through it all, Max ran. The knife clutched carefully in his jaws, the flash drive bouncing in his collar, and the unshakable certainty that if he could just hold on a little longer, he'd find Jake again. The storm, it seemed, was only beginning. The underground tunnels smelled of damp concrete and rusted metal. The sound of Jake and Daniel's footsteps echoing off the curved walls as they moved deeper into the labyrinth. Emergency lights flickered at irregular intervals, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and move just beyond their vision. Jake's breath came in ragged gasps, his body still weak from years of confinement, but adrenaline pushed him forward. "You still haven't explained how a dead federal agent knows my dog," he hissed between breaths, his shoulder brushing against the cold tunnel wall as they took a sharp turn. Daniel didn't slow his pace, his pistol held ready as he scanned the darkness ahead. "Because Max was never just your dog," he replied, his voice tight. "He was part of an experimental K9 unit trained to detect encrypted data signatures. The night you found him at the shelter? That was a setup. He was planted on you because your firm was laundering money for the wrong people." A distant rumble shook the tunnel, sending fine dust drifting from the ceiling. Somewhere above them, the city was tearing itself apart in the storm, but down here, the air was thick with secrets. Daniel suddenly grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him into a side passage just as a security camera's red light blinked to life further down the main tunnel. "They're searching the underground," Daniel muttered, pressing them both against the damp wall. "Hydra protocol means they'll flood these tunnels with gas within the hour. We need to get to the old subway station before—" His words cut off as a new sound reached them, a sound that made Jake's heart stutter. A dog's bark, echoing faintly through the tunnels. Maximum. The bark came again, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of nails clicking on concrete. Daniel's grip on Jake's arm tightened. "That's impossible. There's no way he could have—" But Jake was already moving, shrugging free and stumbling toward the sound. "Max!" he called, his voice cracking. The answering bark was immediate, frantic. Then, from a side tunnel ahead, a streak of golden fur barreled into Jake's legs, nearly knocking him over. Max was soaked to the skin, trembling with exhaustion, but alive, so alive, his tail wagging furiously as he pressed against Jake for the first time in 5 years. Jake dropped to his knees, burying his face in Max's wet fur, not caring about the danger or the questions, just this moment, this reunion. But the moment shattered as Daniel cursed loudly. Jake looked up to see what had caught the agent's attention. The flash drive, now fully exposed from Max's collar, its metal casing scratched but intact. Daniel reached for it, then froze as Max growled, low and warning. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, gently extracting the device himself. As his fingers closed around it, a series of images flashed across its surface, a biometric lock recognizing Jake's touch. The drive lit up, projecting a holographic display that showed a complex web of financial transactions, offshore accounts, and, most damningly, a list of names with Jake's circled in red. Daniel's breath caught. "That's the proof we need, that's the ledger." A new sound cut through the tunnel then, not Max's barking, not the distant rumble of the city above, but the hiss of gas valves opening. Daniel swore again, grabbing Jake's shoulder. "We need to move, now." But Jake hesitated. His eyes locked on one name in particular on the holographic display. A name that shouldn't have been there, a name that changed everything. Eleanor Voss. his fiancée, the woman who had testified against him at trial, the woman who had supposedly died in a car accident 2 years ago. The hologram flickered, then updated with a live feed. Security footage of an elegant office where Eleanor, very much alive, stood watching the same images Jake was now seeing. Her lips curved into a smile as she reached out and touched the screen. "Hello, Jake," she said, her voice echoing eerily through the tunnel's speakers. "Miss me?" Max's growl deepened as the gas began to swirl around their ankles. Daniel yanked Jake backward. "It's a trap. She's been running the whole operation." But Jake couldn't look away from the hologram, from Eleanor's cold smile. "Why?" he whispered. Her laughter was the last thing they heard before the tunnel's emergency lights cut out entirely, plunging them into darkness. Somewhere in the black, Max's teeth closed gently around Jake's wrist, tugging urgently. The dog knew the way out. And this time, Jake trusted him to lead. The darkness in the tunnel was absolute, pressing against Jake's eyes like a physical weight as Max's insistent tugging pulled him forward. The gas swirled thicker around their ankles now, carrying a faint chemical scent that burned Jake's nostrils. Daniel's voice came from somewhere to his left, tight with urgency. "Keep moving. That's neurotoxin. 3 minutes of exposure and we're dead." Jake stumbled blindly, one hand clutching the glowing flash drive, the other tangled in Max's sodden fur as the dog guided them through the blackness. The holographic projection of Eleanor's face had vanished when the lights died, but her mocking words still echoed in Jake's skull, twisting like a knife. 5 years of prison, 5 years of clinging to memories of her smile, her laugh. All of it had been a lie. And Max had known. The realization hit Jake like a punch to the gut. That's why the dog had always growled at Eleanor, why he'd refused to let her touch him in the months before Jake's arrest. A sudden impact shook the tunnel, sending chunks of concrete raining down as the ground trembled beneath their feet. Somewhere behind them, part of the passageway collapsed with a roar of grinding stone. "They're sealing us in," Daniel shouted over the noise, his hand clamping onto Jake's shoulder. Max barked sharply and surged forward, his claws scrabbling against the concrete as he pulled Jake toward a faint outline of light, a maintenance hatch half hidden in the tunnel wall. The dog leaped at it, his weight slamming against the rusted metal until it groaned open, revealing a narrow staircase leading upward. They emerged, gasping into the storm-lashed night, the rain washing the chemical smell from their clothes and hair. The hatch had deposited them in the ruins of an old subway station, its crumbling pillars and shattered tile walls barely standing against the storm's fury. Jake collapsed against a pillar, his legs giving out as the adrenaline crash hit him. Max immediately pressed against his side, warm and solid despite being drenched, his body trembling with exhaustion. Daniel kept moving, checking the exits with military precision before returning to Jake's side. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they triangulate our position," he said, his eyes scanning the flash drive's display as it flickered back to life. The hologram now showed a map of the city with 3 pulsing red dots. One at the prison, one at the docks where Lena and Ryan had been taken, and one moving steadily toward their location. Jake's hands shook as he reached for the drive. "Why show us this? If Eleanor wants me dead, why give me the means to find her?" Daniel's smile was grim, because she doesn't just want you dead, she wants you broken. This? He tapped the hologram. This is a game to her, and we're the pieces. As if on cue, Mac suddenly stiffened, his head snapping toward the eastern tunnel entrance. A low growl rumbled in his chest as figures emerged from the shadows. Not enemy operatives, but a pack of feral dogs, their eyes reflecting the lightning in eerie flashes of green. They moved with unnatural coordination, forming a semicircle around Jake's group. The largest, a Rottweiler with scarred flanks, stepped forward, its gaze locked not on Jake or Daniel, but on Max. The two dogs stared at each other for a long moment, some silent communication passing between them before the Rottweiler abruptly turned and led the pack back into the darkness. Daniel exhaled sharply. "What the hell was that?" Max whined, pawing at Jake's leg until he looked down. The flash drive's display had changed again, now showing real-time security footage of Lena and Ryan, alive but unconscious, being loaded into a black van by armed men. The timestamp in the corner indicated the footage was live. A message scrolled across the bottom. "Come alone to the coordinates below, or watch them die one limb at a time." Jake's blood ran cold as he recognized the address, their old apartment building, where he and Eleanor had lived before his arrest, where Max had been a puppy, where everything had started. Daniel was already moving, checking his weapon. "It's a kill box. She'll have snipers, traps." "I know," Jake interrupted, his voice hollow. He looked down at Max, at the dog's trusting eyes, and made a decision. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out the one thing he'd managed to keep through 5 years in prison, a faded photo of him, Eleanor, and Max as a puppy, all smiling like they had a future. He tore it in half, letting the pieces fall into the storm drain at his feet. "Let's finish this." The drive's display flickered one last time before going dark, revealing a final twist. A line of text Jake had missed before, hidden in the data streams. Asset K9-Max, neural implant active. Remote termination signal engaged. Max whimpered, his body suddenly spasming as his legs gave out. Jake caught him before he could hit the ground, horror dawning as he realized the truth. Max hadn't just been trained, he'd been modified, and Eleanor had always held the kill switch. Somewhere in the city, a clock was ticking. Not just for Lena and Ryan, but for Max too. Jake cradled Max's convulsing body against his chest, the dog's whimpers cutting through him sharper than any blade. The rain sheeted down around them, turning the broken subway platform into a shallow lake that soaked through Jake's pants as he knelt. Daniel was already ripping open a tactical med kit from his belt, pulling out a syringe filled with glowing blue liquid. "Hold him still," he barked, but Jake couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All he could see was the way Max's golden eyes rolled back in his head, the way his paws twitched helplessly as the neural implant activated. The flash drive lay discarded on the wet concrete, its holographic display now showing a countdown timer: 00:14:59, 00:14:58. Daniel didn't ask permission. He jammed the needle into Max's neck and depressed the plunger. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then Max gasped, his entire body arching as the seizure broke. His legs scrabbled against Jake's chest as he fought to right himself, his breaths coming in ragged pants. Jake clutched him tighter, pressing his forehead against Max's damp fur. "What did you do to him?" he demanded, his voice raw. Daniel was already packing up the med kit, his movements frantic. "Temporary neural blocker. Bought us 20 minutes, maybe 30. He grabbed the flash drive and swore. The countdown now read 00:14:30. "We need to move, now." But Max had other ideas. The moment Jake loosened his grip, the dog twisted free and lunged for the flash drive, his teeth closing around it with a crunch. The holographic display flickered wildly before stabilizing, but now it showed a new set of coordinates, these deep in the industrial district. A message flashed. Signal interrupted. Backup location activated. Daniel's eyes widened. He just hacked their system. Somewhere above them, a helicopter's rotors chopped through the storm. Searchlights speared through the broken ceiling, illuminating the platform in stark white flashes. Max didn't wait. He took off toward the eastern tunnel entrance, the flash drive still clamped in his jaws. Jake and Daniel had no choice but to follow, sprinting through ankle-deep water as the helicopter's spotlight swept closer. The tunnel narrowed, then abruptly ended at a rusted ladder leading up to a manhole cover. Max scrambled up first, using his claws to gain purchase on the slick rungs. They emerged into chaos. The industrial district was on fire, not from the storm, but from deliberate explosions that had turned warehouses into infernos. Black-clad figures moved through the smoke, their weapons glinting in the firelight. Daniel pulled Jake behind a stack of shipping containers. "Private military," he hissed. Eleanor's cleaning house. Max pressed against Jake's leg, his body trembling, but his gaze sharp. The flash drive's display had changed again. Now it showed a live feed of Eleanor herself, standing in what looked like a high-tech lab. Behind her, suspended in glowing blue tanks, were rows of dogs. All sizes, all breeds, but each with the same distinctive scar behind their left ear that Max had. "You always wondered why I never let you take Max to the vet," Eleanor's recorded voice purred. "Now you know." The feed cut to a new image, a younger Max on an operating table, wires snaking from his skull to a machine that pulsed with sickly green light. Jake's stomach lurched. He remembered that day. Max had gotten loose and come home with a gash on his head. Eleanor had insisted she'd take care of it. Daniel was typing frantically on a wrist-mounted device. "I'm looping the security feed. We have maybe 5 minutes before they realize we're here." He nodded toward a nondescript building half hidden behind a burning warehouse. "That's where the signal's pointing now." They moved as one. Daniel leading with his pistol drawn, Jake in the middle, Max bringing up the rear with his ears pinned back and teeth bared. The heat from the fires pressed against them like a living thing, the smoke stinging their eyes and lungs. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound could be an enemy. Then the screaming started. Not human screams, animal. High-pitched, terrified yelps and howls that cut through the crackle of flames. Max froze, his entire body going rigid. The sound was coming from the target building. Without warning, the dog bolted, streaking past Daniel before either man could react. "Max!" No exclamation mark, Jake shouted. But it was too late. The golden retriever had already vanished into the smoke. Daniel grabbed Jake's arm. "It's a trap!" Jake shook him off. "That's my dog." He ran. The building's door hung crookedly on its hinges, the lock melted away by some advanced tool. Inside, the screams were louder, mixed now with the sound of gunfire and shattering glass. Jake burst through the door just in time to see Max leap onto the back of a black-clad soldier, his jaws closing around the man's wrist with a crunch of bone. The soldier howled and went down hard, his weapon skittering across the floor. The room was a nightmare. Crates lined the walls, their fronts made of thick glass, and inside each crate a dog wired up to machines, their eyes rolling in pain or fear. Some were barely more than puppies. At the room's center stood a massive computer array, its screens filled with data streams and video feeds, one of which showed Lena and Ryan, still unconscious in what looked like a moving vehicle. But Jake barely registered any of it, because standing at the control panel, her perfectly manicured fingers dancing across holographic keys, was Eleanor. She turned slowly, her red lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her cold, cold eyes. "Jake," she purred. "You're just in time for the finale." Behind her, the countdown timer hit 0000000, Every dog in the crates, including Max, went rigid as one, their eyes flooding with the same eerie green light. Eleanor laughed. "Who's a good boy?" The green light in Max's eyes pulsed in sync with the other dogs, his muscles locking so violently Jake heard his joints pop. Eleanor's laughter rang through the lab, bouncing off the steel walls like something alive and venomous. "You really thought you could win?" she sneered, tapping a command into the console. The screens behind her flickered to life, showing security feeds from across the city. Government buildings, military installations, even the prison Jake had just escaped. Every location had one thing in common. Dogs, police canines lying motionless in their kennels, service animals collapsing mid-duty, family pets dropping in their living rooms, all seized by the same unnatural paralysis gripping Max. "Activation signal went citywide 60 seconds ago," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with triumph. "By dawn, every canine in the state will be part of my network." Jake's hands curled into fists, his nails biting into his palms hard enough to draw blood. 5 years. 5 years of clinging to memories of this woman's smile, her touch, the way she'd curled against him at night whispering about their future. All of it theater. All of it lies. The realization should have shattered him, but instead it burned through his veins like wildfire, leaving only cold, crystalline clarity. He took a step forward. "What did you do to them?" Eleanor's smile widened, nothing permanent yet. She waved a hand, and Max suddenly lurched to his feet, but wrong, all wrong. His movements were jerky, mechanical, like a puppet on strings. The glow in his eyes intensified as he turned toward Jake, lips peeling back from teeth that had never once been bared at him in anger. "The implants were always meant for retrieval work," Eleanor continued, stroking Max's head with possessive fingers. "But why stop there when I could weaponize every dog in the city?" A crash from the doorway. Daniel barreled in, gun raised. He took in the scene with the soldier's quick assessment, his aim shifting between Eleanor and the frozen dogs. "Signals jamming communications," he barked at Jake. "We're on our own." Eleanor sighed dramatically. "Marcus always said you were stubborn, Daniel." She tapped another command, and suddenly every screen in the lab switched to the same image. A military base Jake recognized from news reports. "Do you know what happens when 50 trained attack dogs turn on their handlers simultaneously?" Her finger hovered over a glowing red key. "Shall we find out?" Jake moved without thinking. He lunged not for Eleanor but for the console, his body slamming into it with enough force to send sparks flying. The screens flickered wildly as systems overloaded, but not fast enough. Eleanor's finger came down on the key. Nothing happened. For one heartbeat, two. The lab was utterly silent. Then Max shuddered violently, the green light in his eyes flickering like a dying bulb. A high-pitched whine built in his throat as he twisted toward Eleanor, not attacking but fighting whatever held him with every ounce of his being. Eleanor's composure cracked. "That's impossible! The neural override—" Daniel's gun barked once, twice. The shots weren't aimed at Eleanor but at the tanks lining the walls. Glass exploded, blue fluid gushing across the floor as the captive dogs spilled free. They didn't attack, they didn't flee. As one, they turned toward Max, their eyes still glowing, but their bodies trembling with the same visible struggle. Max's whine crescendoed into a howl, a sound so raw, so full of defiance that the hair on Jake's arm stood up. The other dogs joined in, a chorus of rebellion that shook the lab's foundations. The computer banks erupted in showers of sparks, overload warnings screeching as the system buckled under some impossible strain. Eleanor stumbled back, her perfect hair coming loose as she frantically input commands. No, 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 this can't. The console exploded in her face, throwing her across the room. She hit the wall with a sickening crunch and slid to the floor, motionless. Jake didn't care. He was already at Max's side as the dog collapsed, the green light fading from his eyes. "Hang on, boy," Jake whispered, cradling Max's head in his lap. The dog's breathing was shallow, his body racked with tremors, but his tail gave one feeble thump against the floor. Daniel appeared beside them, his face grim. "The implant's failing. It's killing him." He pulled another syringe from his kit, this one filled with viscous black liquid. "This will buy him an hour, maybe 2. After that, he didn't need to finish." Jake looked around at the other dogs, some already stirring weakly, others still as death. His gaze landed on the main screen, which now showed Lena and Ryan's unconscious forms being loaded onto a helicopter. The timestamp was live. Daniel followed his look. "We can still reach them, but we have to go now." Max whined, struggling to rise. His paws scrabbled weakly against the floor, his eyes fixed on Jake with desperate intensity. Jake understood. He always had. Gently, so gently, he gathered Max into his arms and stood. The dog weighed nothing, all bone and matted fur where there had once been muscle and bright energy. "Let's finish this," Jake said softly. As they turned to leave, none of them noticed Eleanor's fingers twitch, or the smile that curled her bloody lips. The storm had reached a fever pitch by the time they emerged from the lab, the wind howling through the skeletal remains of burning buildings like a chorus of ghosts. Jake cradled Max against his chest, the dog's shallow breaths warm against his neck as Daniel led them through the chaos. The syringe's black fluid had stabilized Max for now, but every few minutes his body would seize with violent tremors, his paws twitching as if running in some terrible dream. The other dogs, those strong enough to move, had followed them out, forming a loose protective circle around Jake and Max as they navigated the wreckage. It should have been comforting, but all Jake could think about was the countdown ticking away in Max's veins. Daniel's wrist device beeped urgently, projecting a holographic map of the city with a single blinking dot moving northeast at high speed. "The chopper with Lena and Ryan is heading for the old military airstrip," he shouted over the wind. "We'll never catch them on foot." As if in answer, a deep growl rumbled from the alleyway beside them. The scarred Rottweiler from earlier emerged, flanked by a dozen other street dogs, some limping, some bleeding, but all with their ears pricked forward and teeth bared. The Rottweiler locked eyes with Max, who managed a weak wag of his tail. Then, with a sharp bark, the pack surged past them toward a nearby parking garage. "What the hell?" Daniel began, but Jake was already moving, some instinct telling him to follow. Inside the garage's lowest level, hidden beneath tarps and debris, sat 3 armored motorcycles with military-grade modifications. The Rottweiler stood beside them proudly, his tongue lolling as if to say, "See? I helped." Daniel let out a low whistle. Black Ops insertion bikes, these were prepped for an extraction. He ran his hands over the nearest one, popping a hidden compartment to reveal an array of weapons and tech. Someone planted these here as a backup. Jake didn't care about the how or why. He carefully secured Max in a modified cargo compartment lined with shock-absorbent foam, stroking the dog's head before closing the lid. "Hold on, boy, just a little longer." The bike roared to life beneath him with a sound like thunder, its headlights cutting through the smoke and rain as they sped onto the abandoned streets. The ride was a blur of wind and adrenaline, the city's ruins streaking past in shades of gray and orange from the fires. Daniel took point, his bike weaving through obstacles with military precision. while Jake focused on keeping Max's compartment steady. The pack of dogs ran alongside them for a time, their forms flickering in and out of view like shadows given life. Then the first drone appeared. It dropped from the clouds like a mechanical vulture, its gun turret whirring as it locked onto them. Daniel swerved just as bullets chewed up the pavement where he'd been. "Eyes up!" he yelled, tossing Jake a pistol from his bike's compartment. The next few minutes were a nightmare of evasion and deafening gunfire, as more drones joined the hunt. Jake took one down with a lucky shot to its propulsion system, sending it spiraling into a billboard that exploded in a shower of sparks. They were 2 blocks from the airstrip when Max's compartment began beeping urgently. Jake risked a glance down and saw the status light had turned from amber to red. The neural blocker was failing. He slammed his fist against the bike's comms button. "Daniel, we're out of time." Daniel's response was cut off by an explosion that sent Jake's bike skidding sideways. He barely kept it upright as a black helicopter rose from behind the airstrip's control tower. Its side door open to reveal Lena and Ryan slumped against a bench, guarded by 2 armed men. And there, standing in the doorway with the wind whipping her hair like a banner, was Eleanor, alive and unharmed despite the lab's collapse. Her laughter carried over the rotor's roar as she raised a device that glowed the same sickly green as Max's implant. "Last chance, Jake," she called. "Give me the decryption key buried in Max's implant or watch your friends take a very long fall." Jake's blood turned to ice. Decryption key? He looked down at Max's compartment just as the dog let out a pained howl, a sound that seemed to shake the very air around them. The other dogs, those still following, echoed the cry until the night rang with their fury. Daniel pulled up beside Jake, his face grim in the helicopter's searchlight. "She's bluffing. There is no key. She's just trying to—" A gunshot cracked through the chaos. One of the guards slumped forward, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. The other guard whirled, only to be yanked backward into the helicopter's shadows by unseen hands. Eleanor's triumphant smile faltered as a figure emerged from the darkness behind her. Lena, very much awake and holding the dead guard's pistol with steady hands. Ryan appeared beside her, his face bruised, but his eyes blazing with fury. The helicopter lurched violently as a new voice came over Jake's bike comm, a voice he hadn't heard in 5 years. "Miss me, sweetheart?" It was Marcus Velt, and he was piloting the helicopter. Eleanor's scream of rage was cut off as the aircraft banked sharply, its open door now revealing a brutal hand-to-hand struggle between Lena and Eleanor. Ryan was wrestling with the controls, trying to stabilize their erratic flight path as Marcus fought him for dominance. Jake gunned his bike toward the chaos, Max's weakening cries driving him forward. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a weapon that could reach them. But as the helicopter dipped low enough that its landing skids nearly scraped the tarmac, Max's compartment burst open. The golden retriever launched himself with a strength that shouldn't have been possible, his body arcing through the storm-lit night like a comet. His jaws closed around Eleanor's wrist as she raised the green device for a final, fatal command. They fell together, dog and woman, into the void between helicopter and earth. Jake's scream was lost in the thunder as he watched his heart plummet toward the ground. Time seemed to fracture as Max and Eleanor tumbled through the storm-racked sky, the green device spinning from Eleanor's grip like a dying star. Jake's bike skidded to a stop so violently it nearly flipped, his boots hitting the tarmac before the machine had fully stopped moving. He ran without thought, without breath. His entire world narrowed to that golden streak of fur falling too fast. Too far, the impact never came. A black blur intercepted the falling bodies just feet above the ground. The scarred Rottweiler and his pack moving as one to form a living net. They hit hard, the force sending several dogs tumbling, but the bulk of the impact was absorbed. Max rolled limply to a stop at Jake's feet, while Eleanor crashed into a stack of cargo pallets with a bone-shattering crunch. Jake dropped to his knees, his hands hovering over Max's broken body. The dog's breathing was shallow. His ribs visibly caved in on one side, but his tail gave one feeble thump when Jake whispered his name. The green device lay a few feet away, its glow pulsing erratically as Eleanor dragged herself toward it, her legs twisted at unnatural angles. "You don't understand," she gasped, blood frothing at her lips. "The data in his implant, it's not just money." The helicopter above them banked sharply as Ryan finally wrested control from Marcus, its searchlight illuminating the scene in stark relief. Daniel arrived at Jake's side, his medical kit already open. "I can stabilize him, but we need—" A new sound cut through the storm. Not rotors or thunder, but the synchronized footfalls of dozens of dogs emerging from the surrounding darkness. Not just strays now, but military canines, police dogs, even family pets, all moving with eerie coordination. At their head was the Rottweiler, his scarred face grim as he nudged the green device toward Jake with his nose. Eleanor laughed weakly, her fingers scrabbling at the tarmac. Too late, the network is self-sustaining now. Her eyes rolled back as another tremor racked her body. The dogs, they know what we did to them. Max suddenly convulsed in Jake's arms, his body arching as the glow in his eyes flared brighter than ever. The other dogs echoed his movements, their collective whines building into a chorus that raised the hair on Jake's neck. The green device's casing cracked open, revealing not circuitry, but a small vial of luminescent liquid that pulsed in time with Max's seizures. Daniel sucked in a sharp breath. "That's not a control device. It's a neurotransmitter. She wasn't just commanding them. She was learning from them." His hands flew over Max's body, checking pulse points Jake didn't know dogs had. The implant, it's not just in his skull. It's woven through his entire nervous system. High above, the helicopter's door slid open again. Lena leaned out, her hair whipping in the rotor wash as she shouted something lost in the wind. Then, Marcus appeared behind her, not attacking, but pointing urgently toward the horizon where a new set of lights approached. Military vehicles, a lot of them. The Rottweiler barked sharply and suddenly the assembled dogs moved as one. Some dragging Eleanor away into the shadows, others forming protective rings around Jake and Max. The message was clear. Time was up. Daniel's hands stilled on Max's chest. "Jake, there's one option left. The implant has a kill switch, but it works both ways." He held up a small injector from his kit filled with clear liquid. "This will sever the neural links completely. He'll live, but—" "But what?" Jake demanded, his voice breaking. Daniel met his eyes. "He won't remember you, any of you. The past 5 years will be gone." The helicopter touched down nearby, its rotors slowing as Lena and Ryan jumped out. The approaching convoy's lights grew brighter. Max's breathing grew shallower. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Jake looked down at his dog, his best friend, his savior, his family, and made his choice. Jake's hands trembled as he took the injector from Daniel. The clear liquid inside seemed too small, too simple for something that would erase years of loyalty and love. Max gazed up at him with clouded eyes, his tail giving one last weak thump against the wet tarmac. In that moment, Jake saw every memory they'd shared. The lazy Sundays at the park, the way Max would nudge his hand during thunderstorms, the 5 long years of waiting that had brought them here. He pressed the injector to Max's neck and whispered, "Be free, boy." The effect was instantaneous. Max's body went rigid, a high-pitched whine escaping his throat as the green light in his eyes flickered wildly. Then, with a sound like a snapped cable, the glow vanished. The other dogs around them shuddered in unison before scattering into the night, some limping, some running full tilt, but all of them awake in a way they hadn't been before. Max blinked up at Jake, his eyes clear but empty. No recognition, no memory, just the instinctive trust of a dog meeting a kind stranger. The military vehicles screeched to a halt around them, soldiers pouring out with weapons raised. Daniel stepped forward, hands in the air, shouting authorization codes Jake couldn't process. None of it mattered. He gathered Max into his arms, the dog's weight familiar yet somehow foreign now, and stood facing the storm. Lena appeared at his side, her fingers brushing Max's head gently. "He saved us all," she said softly. Jake nodded, watching as the soldiers secured Eleanor's broken body. The truth would come out now, the money laundering, the human experiments, the lies that had stolen 5 years of his life. But staring into Max's trusting, unknowing eyes, Jake realized something deeper. Moral lesson. Some bonds are stronger than memory. True loyalty isn't remembered, it's lived. As the first light of dawn broke through the storm clouds, Max licked Jake's hand for the first time all over again. And somewhere in that simple gesture, Jake found the strength to begin anew.